When you need a private jet just to reach a place that historically had zero water and zero permanent residents, you know capitalism has gotten creative. Welcome to Chapter 5. No water, new worth on Ambergris Cay. Our traveller lands on an island so remote that its main claim to fame was whale vomit washing ashore. Yet somehow it now boasts the Caribbean's longest private runway and price tags that would make an oligarch wince. Between Turk's head cacti and the economics of manufactured scarcity, we're about to discover how you turn the middle of nowhere into the most expensive somewhere on Earth. No water, new worth on Ambergris Cay. Ambergris Cay, solo flight and TCI truths. We left the paved complications of Providenciales for the final leg of the expedition, a flight that served as a corrective measure to my earlier topographic error. I had learned, only after exhausting the herpetological possibilities of the resort patio, that the endangered rock iguanas did not live on the tourist-heavy islet I had originally targeted. They were on Ambergris Cay. We were finally heading to their true kingdom. The private air terminal possessed the architectural grandeur of a suburban dental office. Out on the tarmac, our transport awaited, a machine that looked less like a commercial airliner and more like something a handy neighbor might assemble from a kit over a long weekend. In a gesture of boundless institutional confidence, the ground crew invited my son to the co-pilot's seat. He immediately traded his video game simulations for the vibrating, nerve-wracking reality of the cockpit. I took my seat behind them, my mind cycling through a frantic encyclopedia of aviation statistics. The pilot was a man of serene calm who spent the flight tapping dials and explaining the physics actively preventing us from becoming a new artificial reef, a distinct possibility in these shipwreck-prone waters. I, meanwhile, fixated on the economics of safety. These Cessna Grand Caravans are certified for single-pilot operation, a regulatory consensus between the FAA and the UK that allows one person to manage the entire affair. Adding a second pilot would destroy the efficiency of a 20-minute hop, passing a prohibitive cost to a consumer who is already paying a fare that could seemingly purchase the fuselage outright. It is all perfectly safe, I told myself, watching my son's hands hover near a panel of intimidating buttons. Beneath us, the deep Atlantic indigo gave way to the jagged shallows of the Caicos bank, turning the water an impossibly clear turquoise as the island materialized. The private kingdom at the edge of the Caicos bank. The pilot reclaimed the yoke from my son's hands as our destination materialized below. Ambergris Cay sits on the precipice of the Caicos bank, a small punctuation mark of land that, for most of history, was defined by what it lacked. From the air, however, the island's defining feature is not geologically natural. It is a 5,700-foot ribbon of asphalt, the longest private airstrip in the Caribbean. This grey artery slices through the scrub, capable of accepting large private jets and allowing their owners to clear customs on the tarmac, bypassing the chaos of the commercial airport in Providenciales entirely. We aligned with the runway and descended. After landing, I leaned forward to the pilot. I asked if he thought the boy was ready to solo for the return trip. He answered without rhythm or hesitation. Yes. For centuries, this cay was a geographic afterthought. Its name derives from the waxy accumulation of whale indigestion, ambergris, that occasionally washed ashore. Beyond that lucrative drift, the island offered little to early settlers. It suffered from a complete absence of fresh water and lacked the salt ponds that drove the economies of Grand Turk and Salt Cay. Planters and salt rakers inspected the dry earth, shrugged and moved on. This collective indifference proved to be the island's salvation. Ignored by colonial extraction and agricultural clearing, the Cay became an accidental sanctuary, guarded effectively by its own inconvenience. In the late 20th century, developers revisited this neglect. Where salt merchants saw a deficit of resources, these investors saw a surplus of privacy. They reimagined the island not as a resource hub, but as a residential club for individuals whose wealth requires a layered defense against the outside world, the type of people who likely employ an accountant solely to manage their other accountants. To them, the island's isolation was a non-negotiable asset. Today, Ambergris Cay operates as a hybrid, a private estate community dotted with sprawling villas that also functions as a hotel. This dual personality ensures the island maintains the hushed ambience of a private holding while allowing a trickle of transient guests to subsidize the infrastructure. It creates an environment of managed wildness where electric golf carts hum along paved tracks that wind through an ecosystem largely unchanged since the era of Columbus. This preservation creates the irony of my visit. My earlier failed attempt to find the Turks and Caicos rock iguana on a tourist-heavy islet had been a navigational error. The true population lives here, among the billionaires. The island's long history of being unwanted allowed the iguanas to thrive without the predation or habitat loss seen elsewhere. As we taxied to a halt, I prepared to step into a landscape where ancient reptiles and bespoke luxury occupy the same carefully curated space. The hardy plants of a private paradise. That grand arrival on a private airstrip, a runway seemingly paved with distilled exclusivity, creates a specific demand on the imagination. One anticipates a landscape engineered to match the jets, a verdant paradise where every leaf is polished and every flower stands at attention. My own exploration into this fantasy required a perilous journey of about 50 yards, past the manicured grounds of the resort and into the botanical battlefield beyond. The island that met my gaze was not the lush jungle of travel brochures, but a scrubby, defiant expanse of brush that looked like it would lose a fight with a determined goat. This starkness is by design, or rather by necessity. The native flora of Ambergris Cay belongs to the Caribbean dry forest, a system forged in a crucible of sun, salt, and sand. These plants are not pampered debutantes. They are grizzled survivalists, thriving in conditions that would make a hibiscus faint, masters of living on little more than grit and schadenfreude. The sea grape serves as the frontline defender. With its big, leathery, round leaves, it forms a sprawling barricade against the salt spray, a bouncer telling the ocean, "You're not on the list." Behind this stalwart protector stands the silver buttonwood, a shifty character whose leaves are coated in silky hairs. This fuzz gives it a silvery sheen that reflects the brutal sunlight like 1,000 tiny mirrors, the plant equivalent of a con artist in a shiny suit. The Caicos plum stands nearby, offering a small, edible fruit, perhaps as an apology for the general unfriendliness of its neighbors. But the undisputed monarch of this thorny kingdom is the Turk's head cactus. Finding one in the wild felt like stumbling upon a tiny, irritable potentate. It is a stout, barrel-shaped cactus wearing a fuzzy, reddish cap called a cephalium, from which it sprouts little pink flowers. It looks exactly like a retired sultan who has decided to spend his golden years being as prickly as possible. To gaze upon it is to understand the soul of the island's true flora. This creates the central drama of Ambergris Cay, a tale of two worlds. There are the resort plantings, the bougainvillea and palms that require an army of landscapers and an industrial irrigation grid just to look vaguely tropical. They sit in the sweltering heat, dependent on sprinklers to stave off oblivion. Then there is the real island, the vast expanse of native coppice that shrugs at the sun. The resort's philosophy allows both the pampered and the pugnacious to exist, staring at each other across a border of perfectly edged lawn. I assume they don't mingle. But which world was the mirage? The one built to coddle, or the one built to last? Turk's head cactus, Fez, fruit, Turks and Caicos resilience. The coastal coppice delivered on its rugged premise. It was a landscape of tough, scrappy flora that appeared to survive on a diet of stubbornness and salt spray. Amid this botanical brawl, one character stood out, a stout, barrel-chested succulent wearing a fuzzy, rust-colored cap. This was the Turk's head cactus, Melocactus intortus, the organism that lent this nation half its name and seems to be a mandatory accessory for any self-respecting island yard. My journey into the plant's lore began with its peculiar silhouette. To the squinting, imaginative eye of a 17th-century sailor, men whose primary form of entertainment was likely diagnosing their own scurvy, the plant's red crown looked exactly like a Turkish fez. In a flash of geographic inspiration, they christened the archipelago the Turks Islands, an act of branding that has stuck with more tenacity than a sea grape root. To fully grasp the weight of this decision requires a brief detour into the whirlwind history of the hat itself. In the 1820s, the Ottoman Sultan Mahmud II declared the brimless red felt fez the official headwear for his government. It was a bold move to modernize an empire by replacing clunky turbans with what was, essentially, a felt bucket. Its brimless design was practically minded, allowing a devout man to touch his forehead to the ground during prayer without a sartorial dilemma. For a century, the fez signaled Ottoman progress. Then, in a stunning reversal that most disgraced politicians can only dream of, Turkey's founder Ataturk outlawed the hat in the 1920s. He viewed it as a relic of a decadent past, banishing it in favor of Western brims. In a single generation, the object went from a badge of modernity to a symbol of backwardness. The cactus, oblivious to its role in imperial fashion, carried on. That fuzzy red cap implies likeness to a hat, but it is actually a specialized structure called a cephalium. This woolly tuft is the plant's biological command center, the only part that produces flowers or fruit. Once a cactus grows its fez, the green body retires from vertical growth, pouring all its energy into the magnificent, ever-growing crown. Tiny magenta flowers emerge from the bristles, followed eventually by waxy, lipstick-pink fruits. Locals call these cactus cherries, and they are the currency of the coppice. The native curly-tailed lizards, bold little dinosaurs I had observed earlier in the trip, scamper right up the spiny columns to pluck them. Birds feast on them, providing a crucial transit service by dispersing the seeds across the scrub. Naturally, upon learning the cherries were edible, I felt a heroic calling. I had to find a ripe one, a pepper-shaped prize offered up by this protected symbol of resilience. After a brief but hot search along the sun-baked perimeter of civilization, I located my quarry. I plucked the tiny pink fruit from its woolly throne. It had a pleasant, mild taste, offering a bit of sweetness followed by a tangy kick, like a cranberry that had decided to retire to the tropics. It was official. I had braved the wilds of Ambergris Cay for a single, slightly sour berry. It felt like a fitting end to an epic of botany, history, and hats. Caicos, Caicos' journey from cotton to commerce. The cactus cherry had resolved the Turks portion of the archipelago's identity, but it left the Caicos side of the ledger blank. Consequently, the name of the country felt like a half-solved riddle. The answer lay in a linguistic collision. The indigenous Lucayan Taino used the term Cayahico to describe a string of islands. When paired with the fez-capped cacti, the full national branding comes into focus. A Caicos, pronounced Caicos, is simply one bead on that string. These beads are not dramatic volcanic peaks born of fire. They are cays, a gentle noun for what are essentially massive accumulations of coral skeletons and parrotfish sand heaped up over millennia. Back at Grace Bay, feeling that flower-soft grit underfoot, I had realized I was effectively strolling through a geological cemetery. This composition dictated the island's divergent histories. While the Turks Islands enriched Bermudian merchants through shallow salt pans, the Caicos archipelago was the greener, more difficult frontier. Following the American Revolution, British loyalists arrived here, viewing the scrub as a blank slate for plantation agriculture. It was an agricultural misread of tragic proportions. The soil was too thin to support the cotton empires they envisioned. The plantations failed, the loyalists retreated, and the islands were largely left to the formerly enslaved populations. These communities, in settlements like Bambara and Lorimers, turned to fishing and subsistence farming, proving far more resilient than the colonial ambitions that had forcibly brought them there. For generations, the Caicos grouping remained a quiet hinterland. In the late 20th century, however, developers re-evaluated the wild frontier of Providenciales. They saw not agricultural failure, but a vacuum waiting to be filled by high-end tourism. The neglected sibling became the economic engine, paved and outfitted with the infinity pools and luxury condos that defined the modern territory. This history of boom, bust, and reinvention cycled through my mind as we continued deeper into the bush of Ambergris Cay. The landscape here felt distinct from the main islands. We had not seen a single feral cat, a predator that serves as a destructive fixture elsewhere in the Caribbean. In their place, the original tenants held court. Basking on a limestone outcrop was a rock iguana, large, prehistoric, and utterly unbothered. He swiveled his head with the unhurried authority of a landlord, offering a look of profound indifference before returning to the sun, a perfect condo-board dinosaur monitoring the grounds. Ambergris Cay, whale secret to luxury scent. With the etymological origins of the Turks and Caicos resolved, I turned my attention to the specific dot of land we now occupied. The name Ambergris Cay raised a query that rarely strikes one while sipping a cocktail in the tropics. How exactly does the digestive distress of a 40-ton mammal become the cornerstone of the luxury perfume industry? While I had successfully decoded the archipelago's cactus-based branding, this particular label required wading into the murky waters of marine biology and ancient economics. To understand the island, one must grapple with the substance itself, a material that occupies a strange grey area between biological necessity and high art. The sperm whale, a true titan of the deep, possesses a voracious appetite for squid. The squid, however, does not go down without a fight, leaving behind sharp, indigestible beaks. To protect its tender intestinal tract from perforation by these chitinous daggers, the whale produces a fatty, cholesterol-rich secretion. This substance binds the beaks into a smooth, solid mass, which the whale eventually expels into the ocean. It is a process that is less a miracle of nature and more an emergency plumbing repair. Once ejected, the mass begins a bizarre transformation. Fresh ambergris is a soft, black, foul-smelling lump that would offend even the most hardened sailor. Yet as it floats upon the waves for years or even decades, the sun and salt water perform a slow alchemy. The mass hardens and bleaches to a silvery grey, shedding its offensive odor in exchange for a complex, sweet, earthy scent. It becomes a fixative of unparalleled quality, capable of locking fragrance onto human skin for hours and transforming a fleeting scent into a lingering presence. During the Islamic Golden Age, Arab merchants recognized the value of this floating gold long before European markets caught the scent. They established a global trade, utilizing ambergris as incense, medicine, and aphrodisiac, effectively cornering the market on romance and respiratory health. By the time it reached medieval Europe via Venetian trade routes, it was a luxury item fit for kings and prized alongside myrrh. For centuries, however, its origin remained a mystery, spawning fantastical theories about underwater fountains or dragon spittle. It was not until the global whaling boom of the 18th century that the source was confirmed, linking the elegance of the royal court directly to the gut of the sperm whale. The connection to the geography in front of me was no less specific. Ambergris Cay sits at the edge of the Turks Island Passage, a deep-water trench that serves as a superhighway for migrating marine life. The currents and winds in this corner of the Atlantic act as a conveyor belt, carrying the cured, floating ambergris directly to the island's eastern beaches. The Cay is a geological catch basin for the ocean's lottery tickets. I looked out toward the water, contemplating the strange reality that this pristine island was named for its historical tendency to collect whale refuse. It redefines the concept of value in a way that makes the standard trash-to-treasure proverb feel lazy. A better maxim might be that one whale's chronic constipation is a cartographer's muse, for sometimes the most beautiful names on a map are just pretty words for a very successful bowel movement. The arbitrary alchemy of value and desire. The realization that this island, and the perfume industry at large, relied on the digestive misadventures of a marine mammal left a lingering philosophical residue. It is one thing to acknowledge that a rare substance is expensive. It is another to accept that its worth is largely a fabrication, a collective agreement to value the obscure over the useful. The world, it seemed as I stared out at the Turks Island Passage, does not run on supply and demand so much as it runs on rarity and romance. This principle is hardly confined to the sperm whale's intestinal tract. The pearl, ambergris' closest spiritual kin, operates on a similarly dubious foundation. A pearl is nothing more than an oyster's elegant solution to a profound annoyance, a smooth, lustrous tombstone built around a microscopic home invader. For centuries, this glorified bit of mollusk scar tissue held no practical function, yet it became the ultimate signifier of wealth. Roman nobles traded land for them, and Renaissance courtiers valued the perfect spheres above diamonds, all because an oyster somewhere had a terrible day. If an animal's immune response seems a shaky basis for an economy, the history of saffron offers little more stability. These dried, thread-like stigmas of the crocus flower possess the nutritional value of a rumour. Yet, by weight, they have frequently traded higher than gold. The value here is a monument to tedium. To produce a single pound of the spice requires patiently plucking the guts out of 75,000 individual flowers by hand. The exorbitant cost was never about the flavour. It was the ultimate flex, a way to tell dinner guests, "I am so rich, I can afford to eat the colour yellow." But for the undisputed masterpiece of marketing alchemy, the veritable Manhattan project of turning a common crystal into a cultural necessity, one must look to the diamond. For most of history, diamonds were merely shiny rocks among many others. Then, following the discovery of massive mines in South Africa, the De Beers Company executed a masterstroke. They did not just sell a product, they colonized an emotion. Through one of the most effective advertising campaigns in history, they fused the carbon crystal to the concept of eternal love, transforming a relatively abundant stone into a mandatory rite of passage. This phenomenon, a grand conspiracy of desire, was categorized by the American economist Thorstein Veblen. In his 1899 text, The Theory of the Leisure Class, he coined the term conspicuous consumption. He argued that for certain goods, the high price tag is not an unfortunate side effect, but the primary feature. For these items, demand increases as the price rises, a concept that spits in the face of basic economics. You do not buy a luxury watch to tell time more accurately. You buy it to signal to everyone else that you can afford it. The clink of an ice cube against my glass snapped me out of this economic reverie. I looked around at the meticulously manicured grounds of Ambergris Cay. The experience here is a direct descendant of that same theory. The resort, the diamond, the pearl, the pinch of saffron, they are all Veblen goods. They are valuable precisely because they are expensive, objects and places that have been lifted out of the realm of the ordinary by the sheer force of a good story and our inexplicable need to believe it. The paradox of value in a connected world. The theory of scarcity was seductive. It explained the ambergris, the diamonds, and the quiet exclusivity of this private Cay and its Instagram account. I had the universe neatly filed away under a simple equation: scarcity equals worth. I was quite pleased with it. But as I sat in the manufactured silence of Ambergris Cay, my mind drifted back to the chaos of providenciales, and the logic began to fracture. Grace Bay had not been a wasteland of singular, lonely treasures. It was a dense, frantic heap of excellence. One high-end hotel stood shoulder to shoulder with another, all of them fighting for space with superb restaurants, dive shops, and tour operators. It was an ecosystem of quality. By my previous logic, this abundance should have diluted the value of everything. Instead, the density was the engine. I had stumbled upon a paradox that reversed my entire intellectual edifice. What if some things become more valuable specifically because they are not rare? I had to drag my weary mind away from the silence of the scrub to understand this strange new physics. The answer lay in the logic of networks. In this model, value is defined not by the object itself, but by its connections. The classic artifact of this principle is the telephone. A single telephone is a monument to futility, a useless black box that serves only as a paperweight. It is a priest without a congregation. Add a second telephone, however, and a connection is forged. Both boxes become useful. Unleash 1,000,000 telephones upon a city, and you create a sprawling deity of communication, a network of nearly 1,000,000,000,000 possible conversations. The more who join, the better it is for everyone already there. This was the secret of Grace Bay. A lone resort is an outpost. A dense web of hotels and restaurants creates a destination. The ability to drift from one to the next creates a self-reinforcing loop of desirability. The more visitors who post their sunset photos, the more potential energy the brand of Turks and Caicos accumulates. The value there was driven not by what was held back, but by what was shared. My magnificent unified theory felt almost complete, a binary of Veblen scarcity on the little islands and network density on the big ones. Then a memory from the nights on Providenciales threatened to collapse the structure entirely. It was the music. Specifically, it was ripsaw, a rhythmic, scraping sound produced by dragging an old knife over the teeth of a handsaw, the chaotic heartbeat of the archipelago. I had heard it at the fish fry, then on the radio, then drifting from passing cars. My scarcity theory couldn't explain it. Listening to the song didn't use it up, and it certainly wasn't rare. My network theory struggled too. The song wasn't a utility like a phone. I had discovered a third species of value, one built on cultural agreement. A song is just a sequence of notes until enough people know the words. Then it becomes the anthem for a first kiss, the soundtrack to a road trip, or the noise everyone yells for at a beach bonfire. Its popularity feeds itself. The same plays out with a font like Times New Roman. It isn't valuable because it's beautiful, but because its ubiquity makes it a diplomat, a vessel guaranteed to arrive without incident. This grand economic drama plays out in the local airwaves. When that ripsaw tune plays, the one that signals the grouper is grilled and the sun is gone, it is no longer just a song. It is a key. It unlocks the specific feeling of being here rather than anywhere else. The more people who hear it and connect it to this limestone rock, the more it becomes a piece of the island itself, a souvenir you cannot pack but can never quite leave behind. And that brings us to the close of Chapter 5, No Water, New Worth on Ambergris Cay. What started as a remote island deemed uninhabitable due to its lack of fresh water has been transformed into the ultimate luxury destination, proving that scarcity itself can become the product being sold. Next time, we'll dive beneath the surface of these Caribbean waters, where upside-down jellyfish and sunken drones create an unlikely pairing, and a curious barracuda decides to become our most persistent travel companion. If you enjoyed this journey, the complete travelogue is available right now as a Kindle book on Amazon, Conch and Consequence. And if you want to come behind the scenes and get bonus content, you can join my community on Patreon. Until next time, this has been The Rise the Limit. On this episode of The Rise the Limit, we explore Chapter 6, To Have and Have Drone. The waters surrounding the Turks and Caicos once concealed the schemes of Calico Jack and his notorious crew, including the enigmatic Bonny, whose disappearance into history matches the mystery of anything lost beneath these Caribbean waves. Today's tale finds our snorkeling adventurers navigating these same pirate-haunted waters, where a submerged drone and a persistent barracuda prove that some encounters transcend centuries. To have and have drone. The jellyfish that thinks it's a plant. Is there anything more perplexing than an animal that, by all appearances, has simply given up? After a previous day spent cataloguing the hyperactive lizards that treat every patio on Ambergris Cay as a personal fiefdom, my son and I launched a grand aquatic expedition to survey the local sea life. The mission was uncomplicated: float around and judge fish. Yet we immediately encountered a creature that defied evolutionary logic. In the impossibly clear water, jellyfish appeared to be swimming directly into the seafloor, their bells pulsing downward into the sand like living umbrellas folding themselves away for a storm that would never come. It was a baffling sight. A creature whose entire existence relies on floating seemed determined to become a fossil. But this was not an act of despair. This, I would learn, was an act of profound, indolent genius. We had stumbled upon the upside-down jellyfish, or Cassiopeia, a creature that has effectively retired. It plants its main bell in the sand and points its frilly, lace-like arms toward the sun for a clever reason. It is a farmer. Its tissues are packed with tiny algae that act as live-in solar panels, converting sunlight into an endless buffet. The gentle pulsing isn't swimming. It is the equivalent of a light stir, mixing the water to bring in a few plankton canapes to supplement its solar-powered feast. It is the smartest, lazy animal I have ever seen, a gelatinous retiree living comfortably off its investments. As we continued our patrol, marveling at these self-sufficient blobs, my eye caught something that was decidedly not solar-powered. There, on the bottom, sat a piece of human ingenuity in its final resting place. I knew it instantly. A small DJI drone, folded and still. We performed a solemn rescue from the ocean depths, a grim duty to recover fallen technology from its watery grave. Its battery was fused, a last silent scream against the salt water. Someone's expensive eye in the sky had lost its connection to home and plunged into the blue, lost until we happened upon its corpse. It seemed only right to report our salvage, and the resort's concierge later came by our room to collect the deceased automaton with the polite gravity of an undertaker. Distracted by our heroic recovery effort, we soon found ourselves adrift in our own narrative. We looked up to find we had absolutely no idea where our beach chairs were. We were lost, drifting through the teal water with the dignity of men who had just realized they left their keys in a locked car. It was during this period of aimless wandering, a slight navigational crisis born of technological hubris, that we swam right into our reward. A great limestone outcropping swarming with fish, a vibrant, chaotic metropolis of reef life that owed nothing to batteries or remote controls. The toothiest shadow in the shallows. We were deep in that metropolis when my son, ever the vigilant scout, broke the surface calm. "Hey, there's a barracuda over there." I offered him the patented, skeptical paternal response, a noise somewhere between a grunt and a dismissal. Then I looked. He was, of course, correct. A sleek, silver torpedo of a predator hung in the water, radiating all the casual menace of a loan shark in a public pool. I gave chase for a moment, a heroic and utterly pointless gesture. The fish did not even try to escape. It simply moved with an indifference that made my fastest swim look like a drowning man's final ballet. We turned back toward the shore, satisfied with the encounter, until my son spoke again. "Dad, the barracuda is following us." I prepared another world-weary sigh, then checked over my shoulder. There it was. A 4-foot stalker with an underbite full of gangster dental work, shadowing our every move. It was close enough to see with a clarity that was both magnificent and deeply unsettling. I tried to calm my nerves by recalling what little I knew about these creatures. They are supposedly driven by curiosity, not malice. They see a couple of slow, pale, clumsy mammals and simply want to understand what we are doing in their dining room. That is the official line anyway. It is difficult to feel reassured by a zoological technicality when it is delivered by an animal that looks designed to sever arteries. Disengaging from our silent escort, we faced a more modern peril. The current had dragged us down the coast, and we now stared at a shoreline of 16 identical luxury villas. Each possessed the same hammock, the same lounge beds, and the same pristine pool. It was as if a developer had used a single blueprint and a stuck paste command. Without my glasses, the world beyond 6 feet dissolves into an impressionist painting, making our particular villa indistinguishable from the rest. We were shipwrecked in a sea of beige conformity. As we waded through the shallows, navigating this architectural labyrinth, my son stopped. "Hey, the barracuda is still following us." I turned, no longer doubting. There it was, our faithful aquatic warden patrolling the perimeter. This was no fleeting glimpse. This was a formal audit. The fish watched us with what seemed like genuine, unblinking interest. We watched it back, a strange, interspecies standoff between 2 nearsighted land dwellers and a creature of lethal perfection. When our feet finally found the sand of our own beachfront, it gave us one last look, then vanished into the blue. Our ordeal was over, but one question remained. When you are a guest in a place this wild, who is truly on display? The flashy pirate who broke all the rules. It is not every day you discover that a 4-foot barracuda has better navigational skills than you do, but life in paradise thrives on these small humiliations. After our aquatic stalker finally lost interest, or perhaps just deemed us boring, we fumbled our way back to the correct villa. The outdoor shower beckoned as a necessity first and a luxury second. I now consider this feature essential for any future home purchase, though I suspect my homeowners association might take issue with the inevitable public indecency charges. The barracuda was not our only audience. A specific breed of duck had apparently filed a property claim on our pool, treating it less like a guest amenity and more like their personal country club. These were not garden-variety mallards. They paddled with the confidence of creatures who had read the fine print and knew they held squatters' rights. Leaving the ducks to their estate, we headed for dinner at a place called Calico's. The name seemed harmless until I connected it to Calico Jack, the alias of John Rackham. His career reads like a cautionary tale about workplace sobriety. Rackham earned his nickname through his wardrobe rather than his nautical genius, favoring loud, cheap calico fabrics that made him look as if he had raided a haberdashery instead of a Spanish galleon. The man essentially invented personal branding 3 centuries before social media. His greatest contribution to pirate culture lay not in his treasure hauls, but in his popularization of the skull and crossed swords Jolly Roger design. He was, in effect, a graphic designer with a ship. That dinner at Calico's left a historical cactus spine in my saddle. You see, Rackham was just the guy who owned the boat. The true engine of that enterprise, the kinetic force behind the legend, was Bonny. Her life began as a scandal, which is usually the most promising way to start a biography. Born in Ireland, the illegitimate daughter of a lawyer and his maid, Anne was proof that some people are woven from conflict. Her father fled with her to Charlestown, South Carolina, entering the 18th century version of witness protection to escape social embarrassment. He reinvented himself as a wealthy planter, hoping his daughter would settle into the role of a demure colonial belle. The plan failed. Anne possessed a temper that could curdle milk from across a room and a severe allergy to obedience. To register her ultimate complaint against a future of polite society, she married a precisely useless sailor named James Bonny. This act of matrimonial sabotage got her disowned, necessitating a move to the one place that welcomed poor judgment and disdain for authority: Nassau. The Bahamian capital was then less a city and more a pirate-run convention center for fugitives. The fiery redhead who ruled the waves. In those rum-soaked taverns, Anne upgraded. Her husband James had become an informant for the governor, a career move roughly equivalent to serving as a hall monitor in a prison yard. Disgusted by his pivot to law enforcement, Anne fell for the sartorial splendor of Calico Jack. She abandoned Bonny, boarded the Revenge, and ignored the maritime superstition that a woman on a ship brought bad luck. She donned men's clothes, armed herself with a pistol and cutlass, and went to work raiding the waters around the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos. We often imagine these disguises were impenetrable, but the reality was messy. During one raid, the crew captured a young sailor named Mark Red. Anne took a liking to the new recruit and, perhaps hoping for a confidant, revealed she was a woman. I imagine her internal monologue weighed the risks carefully. She would either gain an ally or have to explain a very awkward situation to Jack. The gamble paid off. Mark responded by revealing that he too was a she, Mary Red. The two became a formidable team, their secret known only to each other and their flamboyantly dressed captain. The end of their run in 1720 feels almost too poetic for history. When British pirate hunter Jonathan Barnett cornered their vessel near Jamaica, Jack and his male crew were allegedly too drunk to mount a defense. Only Bonny and Reed stood ready to fight the boarding party. The women who had been forced to hide their gender were the only ones sober enough to perform the actual pirating when it mattered. Jack and his men were quickly tried and hanged, their careers ending with the dignity of a failed bachelor party. Anne, however, was granted a final meeting with the shackled, defeated Jack Rackham. She did not offer tearful goodbyes. Instead, she delivered a performance review for the ages. Had you fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog. The final bell tolled, but the women had one card left to play. When called to the gallows, both Anne and Mary utilized a legal maneuver known as pleading the belly, claiming pregnancy to delay execution. The reprieve worked, though the ending fractured. Mary died of fever in her cell, but Anne Bonny simply vanished. One day, she was on death row. The next, she was gone from every official record in the British Empire. Whether her wealthy father paid a quiet bribe or she staged an escape remains unknown. She exited the stage not as a martyr but as a ghost, leaving behind a legend that far outstripped the man whose name was on the menu. The island's secret life as a pirate haven. Leaving the shadow of Bonny and her complicated legacy behind with the bill, I turned my attention to a more prosaic matter: real estate. Radical independence on the high seas is a romantic concept, but physically a pirate needs a place to park the boat. You need to count the loot, divide the shares, and scrape the accumulated sea sludge off the hull, all without the British Navy crashing the party. While Nassau served as the loud, brawling headquarters of the pirate syndicate, operational genius lay in their choice of a quiet satellite office, the Turks and Caicos. The islands possessed a singular asset: position. They sit squarely across the homeward lanes used by Spanish galleons, which lumbered out of Cuba and Hispaniola so heavy with silver and dyewood they could barely steer. For a captain like Rackham, setting up shop here was the nautical equivalent of opening a convenience store with a broken gas pump at the only exit of a stadium parking lot. The customers were guaranteed, and they were all carrying cash. But prime real estate requires favorable zoning, and this is where the islands offered a master stroke of defense. The geography of the Caicos chain looks like a cartographer's panic attack. A chaotic sprinkle of tiny islands, shifting sandbars, and cut-glass coves, all guarded by a labyrinth of coral reefs. For the Royal Navy's deep-keeled warships, entering these waters was a hull-shredding suicide mission. For pirates in shallow-draft sloops, it was a fortress. The reefs provided a sanctuary that offered an all-you-can-eat turtle and conch buffet and, crucially, secluded beaches for the unglamorous work of careening. Careening was the pirate equivalent of a spa day, provided the spa treatment involved beaching a ship at high tide, heaving it onto its side with ropes, and frantically scraping barnacles off the exposed wood as the water receded. It was dirty, back-breaking, time-sensitive labor. A ship is vulnerable when it is sideways on a beach, and finding a remote spot to perform the maintenance was a matter of survival. There is a strange domestic irony in imagining a figure like François l'Olonnais, a man known for tearing out hearts and eating them, diligently scrubbing algae off his ship's bottom like a suburban dad prepping the minivan for a road trip. Every major figure of the era, from Blackbeard to Calico Jack, likely knew the navigational quirks of these cays. This was not a city. It was a network of private marinas and temporary safehouses, a logistical hub for resting, recruiting, and planning the next round of corporate raiding. The enterprise could not last. The British Empire eventually tired of the overhead costs and dispatched Governor Woodes Rogers to foreclose on the industry. A former privateer himself, Rogers brought a ferocious competence to the task. Once he purged the main offices in Nassau and Jamaica, the strategic value of this archipelago evaporated. The pirates' perfect hideout reverted to a scattering of beautiful empty islands, waiting for the next boom to break the silence. From jellyfish that farm their own food to pirates who spent theirs as quickly as they stole it, this corner of the Caribbean holds layers of history both natural and human. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries aren't the ones we set out to find, whether it's a drone on the ocean floor or the realization that our modern gadgets will one day become tomorrow's mysterious artifacts. Speaking of treasure, next time we'll explore how the pursuit of mythical riches shaped an entire continent, and why the greatest find in these waters turned out to be something treasure hunters initially threw back. If you enjoyed this journey, the complete travelogue is available right now as a Kindle book on Amazon, Conch and Consequence. And if you want to come behind the scenes and get bonus content, you can join my community on Patreon.